It's mostly just me. So all my student samples come from a student last year, Ashley. She is really try hard. We had a prompt today in 5th period about grit, and Ashley's like the embodiment of grit, because even though she came in like decently as a writer, she really like pushed herself to be pretty much like by the middle of the year. I was like, oh, you probably can get a 5, like without a doubt. And she did, right? So we'll look at her writing, and keep in mind, the ones I want to show you and the ones that you have access to right now, those are all in classes. So she wrote all those in 40 minutes. Granted, it's easier to type, you know what I mean, versus writing, but just looking at the quality of it, I was really shocked because I thought she wrote it beforehand, but no, she wrote it on the spot. So very impressed. Anywho, AP exam prompts, how to approach, and then the exemplars here. Let's talk about these real quick, just in the broadness of them all. So they're in this order, if I recall. They might have changed it for this year, but it's always been this way of synthesis first, rhetorical analysis second, and argument third, right? And there's no real magic to this order here, because you can skip around. You can do argument first if you like, you do rhetorical analysis like. You have roughly about 40 minutes for each one. Synthesis, and I'll put this as a quick note here, synthesis, you have 55 minutes actually, because they designate about 15 minutes of you to read the prompt and read the sources to make sense of them here. So that's the longest one, but you didn't need to use the entire 55 minutes if you didn't need to either, right? So the entire exam is 2 hours long for the essays, and then later it's just up to you to designate here. So if you want to start here, for example, and then move your way down to argument and then go up to synthesis, that's all fair game, right? It's just you against the clock and to produce 3 essays. So by the end of it, your hands should hurt because it is quite a bit of writing, but you're going to have to really shift your mindsets from each one to the next here. Go ahead and open this one first. It's called the universal rubric. I know it says rhetorical analysis and it says question 2. That's fine. Like, it will still largely apply to the other 2, and there are rubrics online for each one. This is a nice one though to consider how to get points. So if you open this up, we'll talk about each criteria real quick as to how you score of the 6-point scale. So it's like the same for all of them. It's always thesis, evidence, and then sophistication, right? So once you have that open, I'll open mine as well. Give me a sec, because this is kind of small here. So the universal rubric, it's no 0.5 scaling. It's pretty much going to be either you have the point or not, right? So if you get a 0 for thesis, it means that you are missing something there. If you get a 1, it means you have all the criteria all together, and they're just working off of that scaling there. So 0.5 is something that I do in my class because I want to let you know, like, you're kind of getting there or you're kind of short of that next level. But AP exam, you have it or you don't. So for these items here, let's go ahead and look at the grading you off of. The first one's thesis, and some things to consider of how you don't get a thesis point is, number 1, no defensible thesis, which basically means that there's usually a task at hand, right? Whether you are defending something, challenging something, making a claim that this exists there, whatever it might be, you don't have a defensible thesis. You're making like a general statement, you're making like an observation of some sort, but it's nothing that you can defend, right? So you might argue something like, grit is important. And I'm thinking like, yeah, it generally is, but in your context, why? Or why is it so important? You know what I mean? Because I think no one really doubt grit is important, but it's now the question of, well, what are you defending regarding that? So you want to be really specific in your thesis. You don't have to write a long thesis, you just need a, concise and to the point thesis. Hold on, I got someone who joined recently. Let me just post this one more time in the chat. So this is the folder of items we're looking at today here, and the first one we're looking at is the universal rubric. The second thing you want to consider for your thesis is simple restatement of prompt only. The prompt will have language to it that you don't really want to copy and paste, you know what I mean? So if the prompt was like, defend, challenge, or qualify that schools should have a mask mandate, and then your thesis is like, schools should have a mask mandate because it's too close to the language, you know what I mean? It feels like you're just restating the prompt in itself here. So you don't want that language. You want to make sure you're actually writing it in a way that is reworded or through your own approach. Just get to your stance rather than just restating the entire thing, right? Summary of topic with no clear claim. So you want to be careful with your intro. Your intro also affects your thesis point, because if you have like a really obscure or unclear intro, like you wrote it in a way that your readers kind of like, do you really know what you're reading? Then they're going to basically knock a point off. Even if your thesis is pretty good, that will be kind of graded against the entire essay, but also the intro especially, right? So summary of topic with no clear claim, it just feels like you're talking about the subject rather than actually making like a stance on it. So in this case, your intro is like just talking about the gist of it, the generals, but nothing really in specific there. Or off topic. Maybe your entire thesis is off topic, where they're asking you to I don't know, let's talk about mask mandate again, right? To defend, challenge, and qualify mask mandates. And you talk about like vaccinations in your thesis. And it's like, it's in the same vein, sort of, but not exactly. So to get the point, you need a defensible thesis, which examines the writer's rhetorical choices or making a response to argument essay or a response to this essay, right? So it's either you have it or you don't for thesis points here. Now, argument, synthesis, and rhetorical, again, follow the similar strands of these points here. You might not want to use this for argument, and for synthesis, again, the rubrics are online. I'll put them in there for you as well. But to consider then what scores the points, right? The 1 through 4 scale, at least for rhetorical analysis. We're going to consider this little scaling here and to basically check mark, right? So if you're practicing rhetorical analysis for sure, and a little bit of the other ones, you definitely want to use this check mark to figure. Let me just go ahead and post this real quick. And someone asked a question as well. Let me say, someone had this question. They said, if you're short on time and just write a thesis without a proper introduction paragraph, does it affect your thesis point as well? It's a good question. You are free to write a single thesis as your intro. It's just that thesis better include the premise of that reading or what have you, right? I'll give you an example of that actually in a moment, of a single thesis possibly working as the whole paragraph essentially there. But for those of you who joined, just one more time, this link is for the items today. We're just looking at the rubric real quick, and this is specifically for rhetorical analysis, but it can generally be applied mentally, right? Not directly for the other ones. So one of the things we're considering is evidence, the big boy points, the 4 points here. You definitely want to make sure you put a lot of energy over here. Again, sophistication, it's like the golden point. You shouldn't really focus on that. You should focus on these 5 points out of 6 here. So one of the things we think about is, okay, let's look at the first column here of 0 points. So 0, I think the lowest I can give you is a 1, but then later 0 means like you're just devoid of it, right? So if I was grading in class, I give you a 0 in this case. If you simply restated the thesis, if you had less than 2 sources, right, like 2 examples, or if it's mostly opinion-based with text, and this can apply for all the essays, then you basically get a 0 or like a 1, right? Because you're kind of like subjective overly. You are not really getting any sources out there or any examples out there for me to consider. And you're just kind of like restating what you said in the thesis without really any direction or movement or progress from it there. So that's going to be your basically non-point altogether. How do you get 1 point? 1 point is the generalization of evidence, meaning if we're talking about rhetorical analysis, right? Maybe you observe diction there, maybe you observe tone there, and you just give me like the general sense of it. And by general, I mean like you might observe what the line has tone or a particular word choice you're analyzing, but you never get to the analysis part. You're just kind of like, here's tone, here's diction, and it kind of does this. So I'm kind of like scratching the surface, and I'm not really investigating how it's effective. It's just I see it, and I'm not saying too much about it there, which basically means you have a simple summary of the passage, or your rhetorical choices have little to no explanation, or your explanations of your evidence have little to no explanation, right? So if there's a theme today for your essays, it's explain, explain, explain. Like you have to really assume your reader doesn't know too much about it, or you have to really prove the point that you know what you're talking about. So that's the lowest. Let's just talk real quick about the 3s and 4s, because those are the ones that I think a lot of people are generally in the pool of, and where you might want to jump to next, right? So if you're in the 3, you're looking at specific textual references that support all claims. Rhetorical, you got specific lines you're looking at, word choices you're looking at, structure you're observing, whatever. You're kind of, looking at these areas of interest. Now you're giving us some explanation of how the evidence supports the argument, meaning you are explain to some effect and persuade me to some effect that this device or this idea or whatever is being done for this audience or for this desired effect or what have you. And you're also discussing of at least one rhetorical choice contributing to the author's the writer's argument, meaning you're talking at least in depth one time of how the nuance of this device works. So tone, for example, you don't just observe one word, you're looking at how tone from beginning to end. You're looking at tone from these word choices scattered through. You're looking at tone on how it affects an audience's approach to the piece here. So you're looking at tone from like a really expanded piece, you know what I mean? It's not just the basics of, oh, they have an exclamation mark, they look mad. And it's like, yeah, but that's like a 1, you know what I mean? So when you're looking at 4, then the max points you can earn, you can look at, again, specific textual references, but now you're looking at consistent explanation of evidence in supporting of the line of reasoning. So there's a couple of keywords in here. Number 1, consistent explanation. All your paragraphs got really solid explanations, not just like two really good ones and the last one kind of like burns out and dies, right? So just an example, you have a really solid logos paragraph, you have a very solid pathos one really solid ethos one, you're looking good for 3. And you need to consider too, support of the line of reasoning, meaning everything your thesis is backed up, meaning these elements that you've picked have some relevance to each other. So logos, ethos, pathos, they're all rhetorical meanings, makes sense to me. They transition to each other. It's not like some arbitrary random device that you're picking at or some random argument you're making. Everything has like a tangent to it, right? So everything feels whole. Today, we wrote some argument essays, and I'll use that as an example real quick. Some people had really great examples, but it was like sometimes irrelevant to each other. So let me see what period we're in. We have most of the people from 5th period, I think. So let's use 5th period's example, the prompt, right? The prompt is about like grit and how important grit is. Grit is like overcoming and perseverance, right? So the thing that Mr. Solis used to say, like, believe and persevere. So the question was like, how important is that? And some people said like, it is important because it gets you to places that, what do you call it, you wouldn't have been before. And I was like, okay, I can kind of buy that, right? And they use like really weird examples. For example, they use like a musician in one paragraph. And the next paragraph was about their cardiologist. And they're like, my cardiologist worked hard and now he's my doctor. And I was like, I mean, I guess, but it's like doctor, musician, did it really mix? How'd you get from one point to the next one? The evidence felt kind of choppy, you know what I mean? So there should be some relevance from one paragraph to the next one, and there's sort of some continuation there. So just make sure when you're picking evidence, it should logically make some sort of connection. And then lastly, make sure you discuss the various rhetorical choices or whatever discussion on the topic of you're looking at here, making sure that you talk about in the rhetorical choice, right, how it goes back to the author's purpose of persuasion. Or if you're making an argument, explain why you chose this source and what's the significance of that, whatever, right? So that's kind of like in a nutshell what we're looking at for these essays here, just being as specific as possible, right? And sophistication, I don't want to talk too much about it just because it's a very like rare point, but I guess one thing to consider is you're just writing with an air of ethos. You're writing very confidently and you're writing with a lot of like authority on the matter. I think she's in here right now. I want to use her as an example. I hope you're not embarrassed if I do. Oftentimes when Bianca is making references to things of like politics, where she's talking about like a social study kind of thing, like a sort of like a terminology, right? She doesn't just throw it out there and assumes the reader knows it. She kind of explains it first and then applies it back into the argument itself or the rhetorical choice, and then she'll like pose a little bit of her own kind of insight into it here. So she does a really good job making like commentary and discussing like, well, why did I choose this thing of all things here? I gave it for XYZ reasons there. So that's always something to consider, that you are writing with like confidence, you're writing with knowledge and knowing, and you're not just like, I think this works, let me just shove it in. No, you want to write with like, an actual authority on the topic there. So that's the rubric in a nutshell. I'll answer questions if I need to for this here, but I want to talk about then some of the prompts. And I apologize if this is kind of like a long lecture-y one. So I'm just going to largely kind of have some parts where you do a little bit of analysis on your own, but a lot of it's mostly me kind of like analyzing some student samples and so forth. So let me go over the 3 essays real quick and show you some student samples here and why they're successful, right? So in this one, this is synthesis, the first essay you'll probably get on the entire exam here. In this one, it says, and you can open up if you like, but the prompts over here too. Green living, talking about practices that promote the conservation and wise use of natural resources, has become a topic of discussion in many parts of the world today. Okay, come on, green living. Okay, if you took APES, you should know this. With changes in the availability and cost of natural resources, many people are discussing whether conservation should be required of all citizens. Good question. If we're looking at a more green society, should everyone be green, or more people should be green? Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source, then synthesize information from at least 3 of the sources and incorporate it into a coherent, well-written essay that develops a position on the extent. So extent, meaning a lot, a little, none, whatever, the extent to which government should be responsible for fostering green practices. So government, now they're on the scope here. Should they be responsible for fostering green practices, which means to encourage, to push for? Yes, no, maybe, whatever. You're looking at a spectrum of the extent, right? And that's your argument here. They give you a little context in the first paragraph here as to what to consider as the main topic. And then the second paragraph usually is the actual question. And then later following that, at the very end is like a little bit of reminder of what they're looking for here. So they want to make sure that your argument is central. whatever you're arguing, your stance is the central point. You can use sources to illustrate and support your reasoning. We're not really looking to summarize sources, like they can read too, you know what I mean? More importantly is how you use these sources to back yourself up. So avoid merely summarizing the sources, indicate clearly which sources you're drawing from. They can refer to source A, source B, you can refer to it by author's name, whatever is fair game. So let's look at the sources real quick. If you want to follow me along real quick from sources A through F, we'll just talk about how to approach synthesis and what we're looking for as we're reading, right? So check this out. I'm gonna keep it nice and simple. Let's assume I say, yes, government should foster green practices. And my reason I can come up with later, right? But for me, at least, my stance in my genuine opinion is they should, for economic reasons, for the livelihood of the world, whatever. But in general, I'm looking for pro fostering from government. So I'm looking for my sources. I got to think about a couple of things. Number one, for sure, I want the sources that back me up because that's going to help me, right? Number two, I'm looking for sources that can help enlighten me, meaning I need some information, because if I didn't take APES, for example, or I know very little about green practices, what have you, I'm also here to learn. I'm here to kind of like figure some information out. Number three, I might want to find one example against my view. This is a cheat code, by the way. If you want sophistication for any of these essays, a counterclaim is usually the cheapest way to get into it. The second cheapest way is a nice cheesy conclusion paragraph, but one of the cheesiest, easiest ways to get sophistication is you write a counterclaim and then you go against that counterclaim, right? So it's kind of like you set it up and you break it down. So I'm looking through my sources. Let's look at it real quick and figure out. So we're gonna skip source A because source A is blocked out because copyright, but whatever, right? So source B, title is super important. When they say introductory information, it's that little title box on top here. And this actually gives you the direction of the source usually, if not the first few lines. So I'm looking at US could learn a thing or two from Singapore. Learn, Singapore, another country. Learning, I'm guessing it's about green practices. So in this case, it's pro green practices, I'm guessing. And from the bottom part here, it says the following accepted from an online editorial in a national newspaper. So pretty credible, right? Credibility is really important. And then later, I look at the first line, usually just kind of get a little vibe check, right? It's time to take a look at how Singapore's transportation policymakers deal with the tyranny of the automobile. Oh, yep. This is going to be pro-green here. They're talking about how policymakers have to deal with automobiles, great emission machines here, things that are ruining our environment, fighting against non-green practices. So this one I might use because I'm thinking like, okay, I'm gonna refer to Singapore, right? Singapore may be a place of good ethos for green energy here. Plus, on the AP exam, usually I put a little plus on the corner because I know I'll use this. So plus, it is something that is pro. Next one, it says hot, flat, and crowded, why we need a new green revolution or need a green revolution and how it can renew America. Well, shucks, this one also sounds like it's pro because it describes how the world is now hot, flat, and crowded and we need a green revolution, which is again, green fostering here. This one's from a book about the need for green revolution. Again, credible, it's a book, so it has some ethos to it. So I might use this one as well. Plus, I'll read this one later. Source D, selling the green economy. Ooh, this one I'm a little tricky on because I'm not too sure. Selling is kind of like mid-ground because selling means maybe some problems or maybe there's some controversy regarding it. So I might need to read a little bit here. Online article in national newspaper, okay, national newspaper. So again, trustworthy. And it says, few things are more appealing in politics than something for nothing. As Congress begins considering anti-global warming legislation, environmentalists hold out precisely that tantalizing prospect. We can conquer global warming at virtually no cost. Okay, it might sound like it's pro now in this case here, because there's zero cost to green living, or at least there's virtually no cost, right? At least for the environmentalists. So I might put a little plus on this one here, and I haven't read too much about it yet, but I see some numbers in here. I see some logos here, some statistics, right? For the ones that have like data, those are the ones I might go back into more because your essay is like a research paper. So you want to go back and find some logos for sure. All right, I'm gonna skip to E real quick. Oh, damn, okay, a chart. Charts are nice because they can offer you sophistication. If you ever see a picture, if you ever see a chart, these are really good for you to process because it allows you then to make interpretation, to be a little bit more like controlling of the source here. So I'm looking at this one, it says, in top polluting nations, efforts to live green vary. This one's kind of a neutral source. It's not really advocating anything, but it does have a little data in terms of, and it says, which of these, if any, have you done in the past year? Percentage of respondents say, who say, yes, have done. And it shows people who are from US, China, Russia, whatever, try to use less water, avoid certain products. So it kind of gives me some data in terms of how the trends of countries are. And I might be thinking like, My brain's synthesizing already. My brain's thinking already. One of these pieces about Singapore or like Asia in general and about the US. So I wonder if I can kind of put that in along with this source here. My brain's already thinking about connections and trying to find some relationships between sources here. So I'm brainstorming. And last source from the Department of Energy, Office of Energy Efficiency, Renewable Energy. This one's titled Energy Savers Booklet, Tips on Saving Energy at Money at Home. So this one definitely sees pro as well because it's talking about tips on saving energy. So it's probably about green energy and green saving, right? So this has a little list of things that people can do, and I can use this again neutrally because it's just like a tips, this handbook. No real, no real stance per se. We already know the stance. It's like pro, but then later, like, how can I use this information for my essay here, right? So what did I notice? I noticed most of these sources are pro. I noticed most of these sources are I should be defending green energy. Folks, I know it's the easy argument. It's the one that is most expected. Do that. For the AP exam, do the easiest path. Don't try to be like snarky and sneaky and be like, oh, I'm gonna be different and like be contrarian, whatever. No. Just write the easy one. If like 5 out of 6 of your sources are pro energy, whatever, green energy, just write that. You know what I mean? It's just, you'll save yourself heartbreak, right? So that's sources A through F or B through F here. We look like we're writing for pro green energy. We have a lot of sources for that so far. Any questions so far on synthesis in terms of how to read sources, in terms of our mindset? Any thoughts before I show you a student sample? No thoughts? We're good? I realized I was like waving this tea bottle for like 10 minutes and I didn't drink from it. So that's kind of surreal. No, we're good. All right, let me show you now a student sample. For each of these, I'll show you an intro and a body. And each of these have their, well, pros for sure on what succeeds and why they score 1 for thesis, 4 for evidence, 1 for specification. So here's the intro, super short. This is literally, I think, 1 sentence here, and it goes back to the question I got earlier, where can I just have a single line as a thesis and then body or intro paragraph? Yeah, for sure. Let's see what happens here. So for this student sample, they wrote, although it might harm the economy in terms of jobs in the gasoline industry, the government should play a large role in supporting, educating, and advocating the shift to a greener lifestyle to citizens because other countries' governments have been successful in the past and it would help the nation live more resourcefully. My favorite word, workable. Why is this workable though? Why does this one work? Well, there's a lot of things actually. It tackles the prompt, it has a stance, it has its reasons, it's pretty comprehensive. Check this out, I'm gonna annotate this real quick. In this first line, it says, although it may harm the economy in terms of jobs in the gasoline industry. So the student's kind of like acknowledging the counter arguments, and they're also acknowledging like the issues of green energy, the topic of green energy. So in the very beginning, I already got context. I'm underlining real quick, a little bit of context. Next part, the government should play a large role in supporting, educating, and advocating the shift to a greener lifestyle to citizens. I got a stance. I know very clearly what the student wants. Government should pro-green, and they should not just support, educate, and advocate the shift to a greener lifestyle. So they have very specific language here. There's no anonymity here. Everything is very, very direct and clear. Well, what's the reason though? What's the reasoning here? Because other countries' governments have been successful. So on the one hand, we got successful examples, and it would help the nation live more resourcefully. 2 points, there you go. That's 2 really solid body paragraphs. There are 2 really solid reasons. This here is thesis 101, and this can serve as a whole intro paragraph here. This I give a point for sure, 1 point for sure. I got context, I got stance, I got reason, and I know where they're going. I'm expecting 1 paragraph on other countries' governments, and I'm expecting a paragraph on nations living more resourcefully. This is pretty clean so far. Look at their body. I put this one in black because it's, an exercise of looking at the different chunks of their body paragraph. So this is the same essay, right? Same author and everything. And remember, I expected the first paragraph to be about different countries, right? So I'm thinking, I better have that. First paragraph, they said, since other countries such as Singapore have encouraged residents to switch to more conservative daily living, the US government should follow suit in recommending citizens to go green as well. There you go, just like that. It's a restatement of their thesis's first point, just expand a little bit more, right? We look at Singapore specifically, we look at this encouragement to residents, conserving daily living for their, consumption there. And then with that model in mind, US should do so as well. I got a clear topic sentence. I know this paragraph's about, it's about Singapore versus US. It's about the next steps. So far so good. Thesis, no. Topic sentence, 1. Need some evidence now. Let's check it out. They wrote, Singapore is a particular country that has tried to change how their people get around by trying to reduce the amount of gasoline consumption through awarding, quote, a lump sum tax rebate of 40% of the price of a vehicle to Singaporeans who opt for hybrids. So in short, Singapore basically is giving people subsidies. They're trying to give people tax cuts if they choose more green savvy cars, hybrids from source B. So this student doesn't even quote the whole thing. They just give me a little bit of context from the source here. They give me a direct quote from it, and then they source B it afterwards there. That's what you want to do. You want to make sure that you are explaining it, you are showing that you're an expert of it, you have some knowledge of it, you're drawing the specifics from it, and then later a quote here and there if possible. So far, so good. They also wrote, by providing incentives to their citizens for being more sustainable in their modes of transportation, even if it's just a small step in fully switching to conservation, the Singapore government is motivating their citizens to switch over to vehicles that use less gasoline than conventional cars without needing the use of coercion. A little bit of commentary, a little bit of extra explanation in case you didn't catch it the first time, right? Just to kind of talk about what exactly is going on. They're being the hell out of the source here. A lot of people have this problem where they kind of like drop a quote in and they're done with it. No, you want to talk about your source quite in detail here. Not like a whole ass paragraph on that, but just so I know you understand what that source is about and what you're trying to say from that there. We're going to watch a pretty cool transition here. They said in this orange here, the US government can learn from Singapore's actions because the motive encourages people to switch over to hybrid or even electric cars instead of relying on gas or diesel cars that are more damaging to the environment, and it will not be a risky move to take because they have seen this work favorably in Singapore already. Damn. Now we're moving from Singapore to the US. Remember, the idea was we learn from another country, Singapore in this case, and the US takes notes, takes suits of that. And by looking at this transition, what's the next part of the paragraph we're talking about now? Probably about how the US can learn from it and the things that they got to improve on and so forth. So I already know where this paragraph's going, and it does a really clean job of putting sources together. So next one, they got source C. They're going to talk about Green Revolution, United Effort, Cleaner Nation. They're talking about the US in this case and how they can, make an attempt to copy and to do good here. And this student is like really clever too. I know it's kind of like a nerdy thing, but look at this line real quick. They wrote, the US government could take a leaf out of Singapore's book, a leaf, green energy, making a little pun there. This student is pretty witty. And I'm thinking like, damn, you thought about that in 40 minutes? It's not a bad thing to be a little cheesy, a little corny, a little bit, pretentious maybe, but that's fine. That's fine here. And not too much of just a little sprinkle in there. So you can know they got a little voice in there. So I see this paragraph and I see the rest of these paragraphs here. They do the same thing. One source, connect it, another source, boom, synthesis. That's clean. That's as clean as you get. So in this case, this essay scores 141 if they follow this general, structure to it there. So this is 101 clean synthesis writing here. So your takeaway is this. Don't overcomplicate the synthesis essay or any of these essays in general. You can do literally a single line of an intro / thesis, as long as you bring in the context, as long as you talk about the topic a little bit, stance, reason, whatever, right? And then later in your body paragraphs for synthesis, just make sure you have those 2 sources per paragraph at least, and finding some sort of correlation underneath a big topic sentence like this there. And that's it. That's really how you want to approach synthesis here. You're making a research paper, making an argument, and your argument basically consists of 2 sources per body paragraph there. So that's largely it. Not too bad, not too bad. All right, questions on synthesis so far. That one, a little comprehensive run through. Any thoughts on that? How to write conclusion? That's a really good question. Now, conclusion is it needed on the AP exam? No, actually, the conclusion is usually a sort of nice perk that you have in your essay. Is it nice to have one? Of course it is, because it's a closure to everything, right? But if you just simply wrote intro and 2 bodies, that would suffice. Your conclusion, though, might be the way you earn sophistication. And a couple of ways of your conclusion paragraphs are ending on a big idea, not restating, but kind of like re-emphasizing why your stance is so important, something of that nature. You want to end with something not too new, but to kind of like qualify and exemplify everything you mentioned here. I'll give you an example. So let's say, I'm just going to type this arbitrarily, right? Let's say at the end of this essay, I wanted a nice pro-green conclusion paragraph. My first sentence might be something like this here. I might write something like, I I'm venting real quick. So let's say my first line of my conclusion ends like this or begins like this here. I might write, going green may not be perfect for all, but it is the way to guaranteeing a healthy and sufficient future for all. So I'm kind of like re-clarifying everything. I'm kind of like emphasizing on my stance here. I'm kind of being a little showy, a little pretentious here, kind of like dramatic. And that's what conclusion usually does there. It kind of ends with a little flair on the points you've made prior. So your conclusion is kind of where you can make like a big idea and almost kind of like extended to modern day or to current issues. Because, okay, I know this is kind of like current events, but let's say I had an essay about like, we saw this in the news recently at Roe v. Wade and how like abortion was being pushed for ban for illegal status again here. So let's say I wrote a whole essay about like pro-abortion, for example, right? And my first sentence might be like this here. This one's a little, it's a little political, but what if I wrote an essay about pro-abortion, pro-choice, and I said, imagine a world where men are told to have vasectomies until deemed to be responsible enough to have kids. Don't like the idea of someone controlling your body? I thought so. So I can put a little bit of flair, a little bit of commentary, my own voice and opinion at the conclusion there, something to extend it into current events, current day, current issues, whatever. It's kind of the big go big or go home paragraph at the end here. And it's not long. Your conclusion is super short. It's to kind of like make a finale of everything there or to re-emphasize your points you've made previously in a different way there. Please don't do this. I mean, it doesn't like hurt you necessarily, but it doesn't do any good. Don't do the whole like, let me restate everything my whole paragraphs before said. It's like, I know that's what they traditionally taught you to do for a conclusion paragraph, and it kind of works to some degree, but your reader's going to be like, oh God, okay. You know, I kind of just read your essay already, so I don't know why you're retelling me everything, but God bless. Don't do that. It's kind of insulting for your reader and it wastes time. You know what I mean? Right, but you don't want to be too argumentative-esque as well, right? Yeah, and you don't want to make new arguments. You don't want to like lead into anything extra. It's kind of like just putting your foot firmly down on whatever you claimed previously and then ending it there. So for sure, don't go too far into extra arguments. And this goes for all the essays altogether. All right, good question so far. I'll take another one maybe if I need to. Going once and twice. We've got 2 more essays to go through, so real quick. And sold. If you're still typing, then I'll go back to your question for sure. But otherwise, let me just jump real quick into rhetorical analysis here. I swear we've done some before. I feel like we have in our class, but that's okay too, because we can now kind of like review it and then later look at a student sample to follow. So this one, I'm actually having you do a little bit of interaction with, right? Let me read the prompt real quick and later see if you remember or if not, whatever, right? So this is rhetorical analysis. This one's pretty recent, actually. It says, the following passage is biologist Hope Geron's, I swear I have, but biologist Hope Geron's prologue to her 2016 memoir, Lab Girl. A prologue is an introduction that provides background information to set the context for a literary work. They give this line because it's really important how to contextualize this. It's a prologue. It's not like the middle of the book kind of thing. It's not something that's like a big argument towards the middle. It's how she begins the whole thing here. And that's something to consider. Why begin like this? Geron uses this prologue to give a basic understanding of the kind of work she does and why she considers it to be important. Read the passage carefully. An essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices Geron makes to convey the message of the importance of her work. Super simple. Don't overcomplicate rhetorical analysis. Each time there's only a single task from these writers usually. And in this one, she wrote this book, she wrote this intro to really just say, hey, the importance of my job. This is why my job is important. So how is she rhetorically doing that? Because if someone went up to you and said, my job's important, it's like, okay, how? Well, let me prove it to you rhetorically. I can tell you some stories about it. I can use some writing choices to kind of convey it. So all we're really doing is what are the writing choices she does to make her work seem more important, bigger than what it actually is, right? So with that in mind, here's what I'm gonna have you challenge. And you don't need to do like anything super specific, just a little bit bullet point here and there. I'm gonna have you just try your hand out and see if you can find some rhetorical choices this author makes here, just from your observations of these, I think, 2 columns worth of writing here. And it could be as basic as those pathos. It can be something kind of like, nuanced, like a Diet Coke, for example, or like a chiasmus, whatever, right? You can find whatever examples, but look for some examples. But remember, everything should go back to how does this make her message more emphasized on the importance of her work. So let's try about 4 or 5 minutes on this real quick here, just to make a little bullet point. And if you want to contribute afterwards, go ahead. But right afterwards, I will read a student sample and we'll see why it works so well. So let me just mute myself. I'll turn the camera off and everything, and then we'll spend about 5 minutes or so to process here. Ask questions if you got any. All right, folks, about 5 minutes there. See if you can kind of wrap up your reading of this here. And I'm just going to open the floor real quick if you'd like to kind of contribute either privately for all to hear some of your findings of this from Hope Jaron. Any rhetorical advices we saw here? Again, that emphasizes on the importance of her job here, her work. Any takers on this? Any findings we got?
Like like things dying off to like when it says like someone died in that part, so it's like comparing for getting like the little details and stuff that that we overlook to the jobs maybe that or like things that are forgotten, so they no longer are existing as important to.
Yeah, and as Bianca's noticing here is kind of like her maybe like making, as mentioned, comparison, analogy of plants to human beings. Yeah, making importance to that. Kind of like, hey, it's more than just a leaf. It's more than that. Pretty good one, pretty good one. Anybody else on this one here? I'm gonna chat real quick here, making sure. Got one for rhetorical questions, and you're right. A couple of ones I see in here with rhetorical questions. If you look at line 20 on this reading here, it says, "What did you see?" You probably saw things that people make, and this is kind of another example of it's rhetorical questions, also like hyperphora, right? So hyperphora means answering a question. So in this case, she is asking these rhetorical questions. She's asking these hyperphoras here. And another one, maybe at the end, 56, she says someone died, and she's asking us questions to transition or to bring the audience into engagement or to do a second person kind of thing here, right? So all these devices we're thinking about, again, excuse me, how does it make the importance of her work stand out? And it does, because we're involved now. We're not just like idle viewers. We're also part of this analysis with her. We're scientists. We're scientists. Any others on this one here? Other takers? Twice. Sold. All right. Without further ado, let me show you a student sample then. These are all by the same student, by the way, and they're all pretty good altogether. Oh, got another one here. It doesn't entirely attack the reader, but the stance they're normally taking. Yeah. So in this case, it's kind of like addressing the preconceived notions of audience. It's something that's more like, you're right, it's not an attack. At most it's a challenge, but it's more of an invitation, if anything here. So check this out. From this observation the student made here, you don't even need a device necessarily. You can just observe things that are being done in this piece for rhetorical effect. So if you notice that the author is doing something, you're like, oh, I know what they're doing here, but I can't really find a term to fit that. That's okay, as long as you have a clear topic sentence as to what the intentions are, as long as you back that up with those examples and clearly explain what's going on, that would work too. That's fine. And like that wouldn't like really drop you points, if any, or not many at all. That will still be in the realm of rhetorical analysis. Because if you look at the descriptions of the rhetorical analysis, what do you call it, criteria, it's you respond to the problem of the thesis, so you got a thesis, right? Writer's rhetorical choices, not terms, the choices being done here. You select and use evidence to support a line of reasoning, evidence explained for us, the line of reasoning, demonstrate your understanding of a rhetorical situation. If it doesn't ask you for terms necessarily. So if you don't have terms, that's fine. And ultimately, you can do logos, ethos, pathos. Logos, ethos, and pathos will always work for AP exam there. So let's see how students succeed with this and what they do for intro and single body. So in this intro, student wrote, scientists are typically curious people, observing and questioning almost everything they see. This piece was about scientists. This piece was about observing and questioning and curiosity. So far, they're loading up this first sentence very, very well. They further say, from non-living to living things, they will examine and inquire for more information. I don't know if you guys like realize how smart this sentence is. It seems really basic, but they mention non-living and living things. and how all this kind of fits into the criteria of science, right? Because this author, Jaron, she mentions like leaf. A leaf is kind of like whatever, right? We think of biology as these living, breathing mammals, or these like, observations of the human body. And Jaron's like, no, I'm looking at smaller things. I want to look at so this student's kind of like making a direct equivalence between the two here. Hope Jaron, a biologist, demonstrates this mindset in her prologue to her memoir, Lab Girl, where she discusses trees, plants, and leaves and connects the questions she presents to the audience to further make them out as scientists and telling them various stories in the remainder of her memoir. The student does a really good job introducing the work, the author, the situation here. I don't know if you guys remember Soapstone, but this is a Soapstone paragraph, right? I got a speaker in here. I got the occasion. I got the audience, us. I got purpose. I got subjects. I got tone, sort of, not really tone, but in short, I got an intro paragraph that really packs a really good summary of this entire thing here, leading us to thesis. And they further go on to say, in order to convince her audience of the scientific mindset as a precedent to her work, Jaron uses analogies to form a connection between humans and plants. Someone said that. I think it was actually Bianca who mentioned that they're about like the living things, right? And how the non-living things are of the same equivalence there. A serious and professional tone to gain their trust on the topic, and logos to bring the information into a clear size and scope through her prologue. So in this case, she's convincing her audience of scientific mindset. So this is something she's going to emphasize on, right? That, for all her work, it's about the scientific process. So let me put a little bit of underline here. This is kind of the purpose, right? Okay, well, for rhetorical analysis, she has the purpose down. How's she doing that? Analogies, check, I got one. Okay, I got serious professional tone, I got 2. And logos, I got 3. And just like that, you don't have to do like the rule of 3 thesis statements, but the student does, and it works because I got a paragraph probably on analogies, I got one on tone, and I got one on logos. And I even get a roadmap, right? Because it's not just analogies, it's analogies to form a connection between humans and plants. And they even give me a little bit of a spoiler before getting into it. So this is a really banging intro / thesis here because I get the whole scope of the reading, and then I get a pretty clear thesis as to what's going on, the stance and the reasons here. I got a question. Can you just name the rhetorical appeals like that in the thesis? Yeah, why not? Now, you don't want to just write Jaron convinces of her job through logos, ethos, and pathos, because it's like, well, I mean, to be honest, everything uses logos, ethos, and pathos, right? So if you do use rhetorical appeals like that in the thesis, you do want to allude as to how that thing is being done. Logos to do this, pathos to do this, whatever, right? So don't just like leave a device in your thesis without explanation. Because if I said like, Jaron utilizes tone, okay, number 1, what kind of tone? And number 2, why and how? I need some clarity, you know what I mean, in a thesis. Your thesis should be pretty clear. What's the minimum of rhetorical devices that you need in your thesis? I say 3. I know the rule of 3 is kind of like an obscure and arbitrary number, but it usually works for the most part. And 3 is usually a pretty good finding there. It should be sufficient enough. So 3 is your golden rule. So if you're ever stuck on the AP exams, rhetorical analysis, logos, ethos, pathos, best friend. No, it doesn't sound complex, but it works, trust me. People have done it very, very well. So that's intro. And let's look at one of her bodies now. All right, her first point she brought up was analogies. All right, no surprise then. I expect the first body to be about analogies. Is it? Let's find out. Through comparing plants to the human world, okay, comparisons, analogy, she shows the audience that there is more to the world and persuades them to question the objects around them. There you go. No questions about it. My thesis is my roadmap. It shows me what the body paragraphs are about. She goes on to say, as she explains how humans do not know how to make nature, but are able to destroy it, she compares areas of a forest being cut to France, stating every 10 years, we cut down about 1% of this total forest, never to be regrown. This represents a land area about the size of France. One France after another for decades has been wiped from the globe. And she talks about the comparison of it here and the significance of it here. So the rest of this little bit before the next evidence is a comparison and the explanation as to why it's so effective that she does this device here. Kind of question, how do you find occasion? I often mix up the purpose and occasion when doing soapstone. What's the difference? So they're kind of entwined, right? The purpose and occasion. The occasion is kairos, pretty much, timing, right? What's the timing? What's the situation? Where are we, essentially? So what's the speech we looked at recently? have we been looking at speeches? I don't know if I can think of one like that everyone in student university keen on. Okay, let's talk about Roe versus Wade again, because that's like a common thing right now. So let's say a politician speaking about Roe versus Wade right now. The occasion is Roe versus Wade is being overturned by Supreme Court, and that's causing a lot of trouble. So the occasion then leads to my purpose. Well, my purpose then is to challenge that, to fight against that. My purpose is to persuade you, the reader, to not want Roe versus Wade to be overturned. They're kind of similar in some ways, but occasions like the setting, if anything, and purpose is the individual's goal on doing what they want to do. So it's tied together, but they are exclusive in their own way here. Good question so far. Let's talk real quick about this little section here. I won't read the whole thing, but I do want to talk about how the student explains the evidence here, right? So they mentioned this quote here about how one France is being destroyed. What is it? Every year, every 10 years. What? Decades. What? No. Every 10 years. Yeah. So the student now explains significantly, why is this so good? Why does this make us kind of like buy into it here? They wrote, through comparing the part of the forest of France, this makes it easier for the audience to visualize the destruction that is done through deforesting parts of the forest, as they can clearly see the size of France and group it together with the size of a cut forest. This effectively makes the audience start to wonder about how much damage humans are doing to the natural environment, and sets more foundation to the start, or for the start, of her story, where she calls them scientists. We all know this, actually. We all know that that's the whole purpose of this quote and this kind of writing. But the AP exam, or just writing in general for analysis, they really want you to break it down. You know what I mean? They want you to kind of like almost explain the obvious in some ways. So when Geron's making this comparison of like forest in France, 10 years, 1%, whatever, right? It's like, yeah, I know why she's doing that. It's because like I can imagine a France and like, oh, bye France. That's 1% of the world being gone there. And that's kind of the point, right? And that does make us then more invested, more understanding, whatever. So each of these devices that you bring in, so this one, she has another device here, you can explain another example. This student does a usual pattern of 2 examples per paragraph, and that's something we want to aim for. Every paragraph should have about 2 examples, just because one is kind of like lacking, right? One is kind of like, good, you prove your point for one thing, but there's a whole other reading that we have to consider. So per paragraph, I say at least 2 examples would suffice for rhetorical analysis here. So rhetorical analysis, you just do this process, 2-3 times over, and then later you're good. So always really think about the task you're doing and then the examples you're pulling, right? This is why annotation is so important. Questions on rhetorical? So far, so good. And feel free to keep asking questions, by the way, guys. I'll keep checking my chat, so we're good on that. All right. I think no questions now. So I'm gonna move to my last one, and I'll open the floor for any final questions. But let's do one more real quick. The argument essay. We just did one today. So argument. This one's pretty recent. This is literally 2 years ago, I think. Yeah, 2 years ago. So this one's pretty accurate to what you probably would get in the modern AP exam. And you'll notice there's kind of a trend for this, series of ones I've chosen here. A lot of them about like nature, because the first one was about what do you call it? Green living. The second one was about Geron and the natural world. And this one's called The Machine in the Garden. Surprise, about technology and nature here. I'm not saying it's always going to be about this. I'm saying that one of the big topics they love on the AP exam is science and nature. Okay, there's 5 categories of things you always see on the AP exam for these essays here. You're going to see something about a speech. I know it's really broad, but you're going to see a speech of something, a political thing, a social movement thing, whatever. Expect a speech in some way or form. You're going to look at something sciencey, like I mentioned here, right? Something that is going to be about nature, about preservation of nature, green energy, whatever. They've been doing that for years and years. One of them, we did one for synthesis about like going to space and all that. So they love space, science stuff, right? They're going to ask some about school. A big topic they always ask about is school, whether it be like learning, about cheating, about charity in school, whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's going to be something school related. And I bet you because of quarantine, there might be a prompt one day about quarantine and distance learning and stuff like that. My bad. Other examples, they also love, this is a little bit on the rarer side, but they love political / psychological stuff. So these are like more nuanced, right? So these are your eminent domains, what does it mean to own something? Something a little bit more like out there, where you have to be a little more abstract. Things that you have to like I wonder. And I swear, every year they add something kind of like philosophy-esque, like transcendentalism. They love transcendentalism. They love race, gender type questions, like the big issue type questions there, where it's like opening the floor for you or seeing what the author says about that there. So those are kind of the big things like you should cover. Nothing really beyond that for the most part. So it's basically the subject you learn in high school. It's really just like your science, math, science, well, not math, but your science and history stuff. So let's look at this last one, right? It's argument, 40 minutes like the rest of them here. This one, and I'll have you do a little brainstorm for this one too. This one says, in the machine in the garden, technology and the pastoral means nature, ideal in America, a book on the relationship between technology and culture in the United States, cultural historian Leo Marx, not Karl Marx, Leo Marx, describes a defining human conflict in the modern age. On the one hand, Marx argues the machine attracts us because technology amplifies human power, increasing the efficiency of human labor and expanding human wealth. On the other hand, it threatens to destroy the garden, the spaces and activities where humans find comfort and rest. This is kind of a cool prompt to me, honestly, because it kind of shows like the paradox and the split that humans suffer from. On the one hand, we love our trains, our computers, our big screen TVs, our skyscrapers, technology. We love this stuff because it shows what it means to be human, right? Progressive, futuristic, whatever. But the more of this we have, the less garden we have, the less nature we have. Anything from parks to lakes to really any sort of like environmental setting is slowly being destroyed. And that's where we also find our comfort and rest. So we have the compromise between these two worlds here. So here's the question. Write an essay that argues your position on the extent, how can you measure that, right? The extent to which it is possible to achieve a harmonious balance between the ideals represented by the machine and the garden. So the question really is this: can we find that middle ground between machine and garden? Or is it always going to be more machine than garden? Is it going to be more garden than machine? What do you think about this here? This one's actually kind of a big brain question here. So let me see what you think about this here. You can definitely brainstorm a little bit. I'll give you some time to just think it through here. Take about 4 or 5 minutes, just kind of your stance, your reasons maybe. I'll ask some people, but just kind of like think about how you might approach this prompt if it were given to you. So take a few minutes here. We'll come back in a sec. All right, just a little brainstorming. Just kind of think about what you might respond to here. But any takers on this by chance? This is like again, this is a tricky one. But anyone want to kind of just throw out an approach to this one? Kind of like a thought about the sort of like machine garden thing. Any takers on this one here?
I think we're currently existing in it in a way,
Oh,
but I think one day one will have to overpower the other one. And with
mm,
like the current like spectrum of technology and everything, I think that we are becoming so dependent on the use of computers, internet, technology, and anything that's man-made, if that makes sense,
mhm.
that we kind of destroy the nature around us to get a sense of this like man-made ideal, such
Mhm.
as people like I don't know if this is a really good example, but you know back in like the 2000s where before there was like GPS that like you can use to like navigate, like let's say you're going to like somewhere foreign and you're like driving somewhere
Mhm.
and you didn't have a GPS, so you would have like these maps and like you know the sidekick thing,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like
yeah.
you would have to like do that, and that's more like naturist because it's a lot less dependent on like an AI or a system. Like let's say like now we have like Tesla and things like that where it we don't actually have to do anything. We just tell them what to do and they do it for us. So we become dependent on the machines. But we've seen it throughout history how we shifted from being cavemen who created everything from nature to now we have robots, we have cars, and I think that one day that one of them will take over.
And from your stance so far, it sounds like that thing that takes over is probably the machine. I'm guessing.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that, but like if we do want to go back, then it's going to be really hard because we're so used to the technology that we're so dependent on.
That's a pretty good stance on it altogether. So what Bianca could be doing is on her stance, because remember the prompt's asking for, is it possible to achieve a harmonious balance between the ideals represented by machine and garden? So what she's kind of saying is no. It seems to be that one side is kind of like overseeing the other, and it's part of the machine side. And if humans ever want to go back to the garden, it's going to be pretty hard because the other side has dominated over. So she's challenging that, claim for harmonious, which is absolutely fine. That is a really good way to approach this here. So yeah, I would take that as, it's not a thesis yet, right? But there's a really good direction for that observation there. Any other takers on, by the way? Any other one thoughts there? So one person says, I think it can be harmonious because we have set aside protected areas for, quote, the garden, like national parks. That's a good point. That's a really good example that can be evidenced later. So in this case, you could look at different places where humans kind of like put like a no-go zone, kind of like a, this is nature, this is the garden. You can't, trespass in this garden here. And he can claim that it's possibly harmonious, right? Because the arguments extend. So if Bianca's arguing like, no, it's pretty like a power struggle and one side's winning, even you, sorry, I revealed who it was. One person argues that it can be harmonious if certain moves are being done. My bad. Reading these names out here. Sorry, I got exposed. Now everyone's like, I don't want to go anymore. This guy's gonna read my name. I'm sorry. All right. Well, and the possibility that everyone's now afraid to contribute. Let me go over the student sample real quick and consider then how did they approach it. Remember, these were all 40 minutes. These were all students sitting there figuring out how to approach these essays. And we'll look at this last one real quick to see the approach. So this intro, again, not super long, right? Just a little bit small paragraph. I know it looks like a big dense paragraph, but it's not too bad. They said, as humans have grown and advanced over the millennia, many may wonder whether those developments are helpful to maintaining our welfare and culture. Good question. Kind of like reflective and introspective about technology. Through technology, humans have made much more progress in developing bigger and better inventions that enhance many aspects of life, but other creations may inhibit on some of those features as well. Leo Marx demonstrates this in his book, The Machine in the Garden, where he explains how the machine expands human wealth and efficiency, but also how this growth can undermine the garden where humans find happiness and leisure. I think this is something I really want to emphasize for everybody for their argument essays, or really any essay too, in your intro, you do want to allude directly back to the source we're tackling. It's a really easy way to make sure we know what you're reading and understanding here. So for your, maybe not synthesis, for your argument and rhetorical, you definitely want to refer to that main source that you're focusing on, whether it's Duran in her book, whether it's Leo Marx in his book here. If they're giving you like a quote, or they're giving you like some sort of like context to work with here, I would say putting your intro 9 out of 10 times, it just works that much better for the build up to addressing the prompt, right? So the student notices the issue, and they said in their thesis, although it may take up physical space to make way for newer buildings and industries, it may be possible to have a balance between the ideals of technology and that of culture, because the expansion of technology allows the spread and exchange of various cultures and allows people to be with each other, whether wherever and whenever. So this is kind of an interesting approach, because this student saw the garden as culture, meaning that it's like communities, it's like traditions, it's like, if the garden is kind of like the ways back then of living, then that is being competed against technology, wealth, efficiency, whatever, right? So they kind of defined it differently here. The garden is more of us in the past, in our behaviorisms. And I'll buy that. I would buy that, because the quotes and the ideas are kind of up for interpretation to some degree. You don't have to be like so hard and fast on a particular definition. You can kind of like make it a little more malleable, if anything, here. So that's their approach. Let me see how they tackle this in their first body then. So in this first body, they said, as technology is designed to expand human wealth, this may also be helpful to spreading culture and activities of various people from around the world. Okay, this is a nice, smart topic sentence, because now they're tackling that thesis, right? The thesis was, yes, there can be balance between culture and tech and that wealth and everything like that. And in this first paragraph, they're already tackling that it can spread culture while still expand the human wealth. So it's kind of like a win-win situation, a nice balance between the garden and the machine. Well, how's it possible? We'll find out. On platforms such as Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube, this has made it much easier for people to view what other people practice as a way to find comfort or simply have fun. As technology improves, this allows for the expansion of culture as well, since aspects of different lifestyles, such as forms of entertainment and philosophies, or two philosophies, can be viewed by almost everyone who has access to technology. For example, music is an activity many like to enjoy listening to as a relief method or emotional output. And as technology has grown, music can be heard on platforms such as Spotify, Apple Music, or even YouTube, and it adds to the quote garden rather than destroying it, as it expands the activities that humans find comfort in. Wow, okay, I like this, because they're really sticking to their guns on the definition of nature, or the garden rather, that music is a part of human nature, about human communities and all that, and the machines allowing us to spread that garden across. So that's kind of a cool look at this whole thing. If I was a reader, I'd be like, okay, that's kind of sophisticated. You know what I mean? Like, this is kind of a very nuanced and different way of thinking about it and redefining it. It doesn't always work, but this is one way we can definitely get sophistication, where we kind of like reinterpret and reimagine the prompt a little bit, or the definitions, and work our way through there. And the student ends off with finding a balance between the growing technology and culture is feasible, as these platforms make money off of views and listens, as well as ads, which stimulate the economy as technology targets. But it also gives more opportunities for humans to create spaces where they can enjoy themselves. And that's like nice. That's what harmony is, right? You make that money, you make that peaceful area for the garden, put them together. There you go. You prove your point. So this student, even though they have kind of a different way of thinking about it, they stick to their guns and they defend it there. And so in this case, they're going to keep doing that over and over between the machine and the garden. Keep making sure you're back on that prompt. Keep making sure you're looking back at what is the premise of the entire argument. Don't stray too far. Keep on that goal essentially there. And they don't waste words. Like, if you notice from the examples I've shown you guys so far, like these paragraphs are nice and dense. They never go too far off from the main point there. It's always like example, commentary, example, commentary. They never kind of like go into these like weird tangents or anything like that. It's always like, let me stick to my point and let me make my point here. So this is why this is like clean writing, you know what I mean? Like, it's just answering it as best as possible without any like, derailing here. So these are the 3 essays you're tackling. And the only difficulty, to be honest, is just time and randomness. That's really it. Like the APLA exam, you can't really practice for these essays besides having practice. You know what I mean? If you really wanted to study, for the AP exam for the essays, I just say this. I just say like have a bunch of prompts open. AP exam, their website has a bunch of like old essay prompts and everything. I would just go back through them and just brainstorm. You know what I mean? Don't write the actual essay, but just think like, what would I say? What do I see? Get comfortable with like opening a new page and like, getting the prompt right in front of you. You know what I mean? And just kind of like navigating your way through the language of AP exams and all that. And it's not too bad. To be honest, it really isn't. It really, if anything, besides the MCQ, the AP exam is like a formal interview of how well you can explain yourself in a short amount of time. So think of it like that, and you'll be okay. So that's my little run through. Sorry if it was like a very lecture-y, review. I hope that wasn't too hard to follow, but those are the 3 essays you're tackling essentially for the AP exams. So if you have any questions about anything that we covered today, or if you want to like talk about something we didn't cover, just let me know. We'll talk about that real quick. But if you're good, the folder is available for you. I'll make a big post in a moment for all the things we've done this week here. So I'll post the videos for our 2 sessions. I'll post these folders of these items here, just to kind of review, and then you can access like the slides and everything and all that there. And yeah, it's kind of like, have a little reference point there. So those are my items. Any questions by chance before we end the day? No, we're good. I hope we're good. All right. If no questions, then folks, enjoy your Wednesday. Good luck on APUSH. That's coming up on Friday. So for AP Lang, at least, I probably just like say that for the weekend and Monday. You know what I mean? Focus on one exam, not the 2. Don't chase 2 things. Go for 1, and then later, yeah. Hopefully, you guys are just generally confident. You know what I mean? Just having an air of confidence. Just walk with some ethos on. All right. If no questions, then I'll see you, and then peace out. I'll see y'all next time, if I do. Have a good evening, everybody. Peace out, peace out, peace out. I'm gonna go eat soon. No worries. Peace out. See you, Will.